All right, welcome to everybody who's arriving early. One of the things I love about working with property managers is you guys tend to be on time. Um, Not always the same with some of my realtor webinars, where I end up with 5 minutes after is kind of the official start time, which is fine. But we will be starting right on time. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me and see me okay and see the presentation. If you wouldn't mind, I know most of you are probably at this time used to Zoom. This is a different webinar platform. Obviously, this is Webinar Jam. Functions are pretty similar to anything you might be used to, but if you can hear me and see me okay, if you wouldn't mind, go into the chat function and just type that you can hear me, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right, perfect. And you can probably see as well, I've already shared with you the slides. So the slides from the presentation, I clicked share. That's what I like. Webinar Jam allows me to do some of that fancier stuff I can't do as easily in other platforms. I use this sometimes. I use Zoom sometimes. But one of the nice things about Webinar Jam is you guys will get access right after you leave. I think it even automatically sends you an email. If not, I'll make sure you get one to the recording of this. So you'll get there's a replay room where you'll be able to replay this through, and I can share the slides with you. Already have done so. So it's noon. Let's jump in. This is what I call a QuickLearn webinar. So we've only got 30 minutes. Obviously, I cannot teach everything there is to be about negotiations in 30 minutes. My typical negotiation class, even non-real estate related negotiation class, is a 6-hour training. I can boil it to 2 hours if I take out all the practice and interaction and some of the details. So what are we going to do in 30 minutes? Well, what I've done is I've gone back to that 6 of the nuggets, but primarily the things that if I could give anything to a property manager, what would it be stuff? And I'm hoping that you walk away from this a little bit challenged. But most of you, I can tell, I know some of you who have registered for this, most of you are veteran property managers. It's not like you really need negotiation 101. And if you do, I'm happy to help you with that. But what you probably are looking for is fresh perspective or some help for some tough areas. And I'm hoping we can get some of that accomplished today. Again, 30 minutes, we're not going to get all of that, but I'm hoping that I can at least 30 minutes from now know or hear back from you guys that, you know what, you've given me some things to think about and apply that I think will improve. And for a lot of us who've been doing property management for a long time, we have to constantly come back again and again and look at our mindset. It's very easy to end up in the us versus them mindset, even if that isn't who you are. A lot of times we become property representative, they become renter representative, and it almost our negotiations almost become more of a legal proceedings, which is not the mindset to have in any good negotiation. So I'm hoping I can at least return you to the better mindset, but then give you some really practical things that I think will be helpful. So let's dive in since we have such limited time. As I'm going through, if you have questions, just jump right into the chat, type those questions, and I'll get to them. As you can see, I can go in and mark things as questions or mark them as chat. So as questions come through, I'll mark them as questions. I think you might even be able to do that also. And then I will try to get to those at the end if we have time. If we go over, that's fine. If you have questions, I'm happy to stay as long as I'm answering questions. So the idea here is we want to get and we want to keep tenants. I hesitated to even make this lease and renewal negotiations because they're two different types of things. One's sales and one's keeping. But because the point I'm making today can be applied to both, I decided to go ahead and talk about leasing and renewal. The first thing we have to do is we have to ask ourselves a deep question. Whenever we approach anything at all, when it comes to negotiations or sales. We take with it presuppositions, pre-existing beliefs, and we have to investigate those. A lot of times when I get asked questions about should I do this or should I do that when it comes to selling or negotiations, I can't really answer it until I understand something of your own philosophy, because a lot of the answer is going to be determined about how you believe or how you feel a certain thing should go. Hopefully that makes sense. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is your pricing philosophy? What is my pricing philosophy? Now, some of you are actual property manager owners, and some of you are representing owners. So if you're a representative of an owner, then you may have 5 different owners and 5 different pricing philosophies. So what I'm telling you is, before you sign that contract to be a property manager for an owner, you need to ask them this question: what's your pricing philosophy? And you're gonna have to frame that up a little bit for them. So I get it. Property management is a business and not a charity. We are not Habitat for Humanity. I can't tell you how, if I had $1 for every time I heard a property manager say, I'm not Habitat for Humanity. That said, we have to ask ourselves, are you willing to lose a tenant if rent can substantially increase with a new one? Right? We've all been there. And are you willing to, and you're not going to be able to see that with my camera in the way. I'm going to drop my camera off for a minute so you can see the slide. Are you willing to take below market rents if you can maintain a consistently high occupancy rate? Those are deep questions. Are you willing to take below market rent? So if you want to, jump in the chat and go ahead and answer those. I don't know if you can really give one-word answers. I think you'd all probably say depends. But are you willing? Question number 1, are you willing to lose a tenant if rent can substantially increase with a new one? Or are your owners willing to lose a tenant if rent can substantially increase with the new one? Maybe jump in the chat and say, maybe you don't want to say. But to give some context behind that, when I was a property manager for a very large real estate investment trust, we would have situations where we would do a lease up or whatever. Let's set lease ups aside. That's kind of different. But we would have situations where we would be renting, and this was multifamily, but we would be renting, say $800 a month for a 2-bedroom. And, a year later, we were able to get $1,200. And so we would mark up rents from $800 to $950 or $800 to $1,200. And the answer was, well, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. By the way, rents everywhere else is $1,200. So people were kind of feeling held hostage. And I learned how to negotiate renewals in that situation and how to keep people. So I was able to keep people and raise the rent to $1,200. Now, that said, I did not fundamentally appreciate the pricing philosophy. And I did not like and I learned a lot from it. I'm putting a lot of what I learned in this today. And a lot of you are saying smart stuff. What about the loss of rent if it doesn't get re-rented? Quality of the tenant is a big part. Costs more to have turnover. Typically things you hear property managers say. Now, not necessarily things we hear owners and investors saying. Owners and investors sometimes say, it's all a balance sheet to me, and that's what I pay you for. So sometimes we get caught between the crossfires, and it can be an issue. And so even if you're caught within the crossfire, I want to be able to help you today. Tim says, I usually discuss with the owner beforehand and suggest my opinion. Most usually leave it up to me. And that's excellent. What we have to have is we have to understand these questions, though. We have to understand the pricing philosophy. And we'll get into this later, but it cuts both ways. If you're willing to raise rent substantially on someone because you can turn them over and make more profit, are you willing to reduce rents as well? And so it cuts both ways, and I've seen it happen. So this is our challenge. The challenge in rental negotiations is always the same. How can I raise the rent or charge a premium rent in a leasing situation without equally increasing perceived value? If you are leasing and somebody says, hey, up the road, they have X and you don't have X, but you're charging the same, what can you do about that? Well, I can't change structurally the size of bedrooms. I can't do a lot of things that I can't add amenities overnight. There's a lot of things I can't do. So what we typically go to is the bottom line. We instantly get into pricing negotiations. And what I want to show you today is that is the last step that I would suggest you ever do. And hopefully I can shed some reasons why. So there's 3 steps to rental negotiations, whether these are renewal or leasing. First, we have to know the tenants or future tenants, potential tenants, I'll call them prospects, present perceived value. We have to know their perceived value. Value, like beauty, is relative. Okay, it's relative to the person. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Value is in the eye of the renter. Then we have to be able to demonstrate an increase in value. So if I'm going to negotiate up, then I have to know the present perceived value. I have to be able to demonstrate an increase in value, and we have to find agreement. And that should be logical. The thing I want you to understand is that has to take place, or it takes place best sequentially in a linear fashion. Step 1, know present perceived value. Step 2, demonstrate an increase or maintaining of value. And step 3, find agreement. And we tend to do it opposite. We tend to approach it in an opposite way. So, or we're all over the map with it, where it really should happen logically. So step 1, knowing present value. The value in the mind of your prospect or tenant is relative to them, as I've already said. It is our job to first ask great questions in order to know exactly what their bargaining chips are. When I do a 6-hour negotiation training, I spend a lot of time on this philosophy of bargaining chips. I'll try to say it in less than 2 minutes here. But the idea is simply this. We tend to approach negotiation saying these are all the chips on the table, right? Rent price, quality of the housing, market value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've got everything there that we call bargaining chips. And so we tend to approach negotiation with our bargaining chips on the table, or what we believe they should be. But the buyer typically does not. The renter typically does not. They typically come with their own set of bargaining chips. Things like safety, things that we can't promise, right? You hear it all the time. Things like what their kids think, things like school zone or stuff like that. And maybe those are some of your bargaining chips too. Here's the big point. The value of each chip is relative to the perception of the individual. So we might think the biggest bargaining chip is rental price, but to them, the biggest bargaining chip might actually be location to the nearest Publix. And here's the other part of that. They might not even be aware that that's what's influencing their decision so much, because people typically don't have command of their emotions to such a place that they even understand rationally how they're being influenced. People manipulate themselves. Our emotions manipulate us. So why do I say all of that? Because when we approach negotiations as a master, if you really want to master negotiations, you have to master this philosophy. Negotiations is actually less tactics than people realize. It's much more psychological. And the first step in the psychology of negotiations is really understanding bargaining chips. You have to understand you have certain perceived biases coming in. They have perceived biases coming in. Those are represented by specific bargaining chips. Each one has a perceived value based on the individual. And here's the big point. It's our job first to not let them know the bargaining chips. We don't get to name the game. It's our job to understand theirs. What are their bargaining chips and what are the values of their bargaining chips? We're going to play with their chips and ours. And that's called win-win negotiation. So you don't want to play a hand if you don't know what the other opponent is playing with. We have to get all their chips out on the table. Okay, use too many gambling analogies here, but if we don't know how many chips they have or how many cards they have, whatever illustration you want to use, we got to get them all out on the table before we start bargaining. What we tend to do is try to tell them that these chips are the only chips we can play with, and you have to play with these chips. So when they say, but I'm going to play this chip, and we go, no, that's irrelevant because of this chip, market value, for example, is the big one we like to play. We're not going to win the game because they're going to take the rest of their chips off the table and go somewhere else. Even though we're right, we lose. And more often than not in property management, I think we are right, but we lose. We use the right arguments, but they don't see it that way. We win the justified debate, if you will, but we lose the persuasive argument. And that's what I want to avoid. So let's look at this a little closer. So to be a trusted advisor is our goal here, not a salesperson. So to get these questions, and again, I've shared the slides with you guys. You should all have the slides. So you can look back at these questions. We want to ask questions like this before we start negotiating. They could even have the price from your renewal letter in front of them, or they could have the price from your rental ad in front of them. So they already know the price, but we still want to ask questions like this. So 6 months from today, what does the ideal living situation look like to you? And how did you get there? We're asking that because number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, neighborhood, all that aside, we actually want to know what their emotional bargaining chips are that they might not even be aware of. And these questions bring it out. And they'll say things like, I just see me and my family together. I see us having sleeping better at night. I see us not having to commute far. Well, that's great. Those are big bargaining chips to them. Those are the ones that matter most to them. So while rent might be the thing it seems like they want to die on a hill over, those are actually the bargaining chips that matter. So you can actually have all the value on your side because you provide all those things and not have to worry so much about getting tied up in locking antlers over rent if you understand their bargaining chips. And what we're going to do in negotiation is keep pointing them back to the value they're getting. If we're going to do that and not be defensive in doing that, what we have to do up front is understand that value. So we ask them questions like, what's your nice to haves versus your need to haves? What are your thoughts on the present rental market? Notice I say, what are your thoughts on the present rental market before I go and try to educate them on what their thoughts should be on the present rental market. Well, rents have gone up $1,000 is not what they want to hear if I'm trying to persuade them. Instead, what I would say, what are your thoughts on the current rental market? And they may say things like, I have no idea what rents are. They may say things like, well, I'm finding apartments for $600, but they're in a totally different neighborhood with a totally different asset class of apartments. These could be not luxury homes and you're selling a luxury home, or it could be that it's, off the interstate and is a terrible place to live because the noise is so loud. The fact of the matter is that, it may be the same number of bedrooms, same number of baths, but location, it ain't the same. What we need to do is not argue with them on that. We need to understand how they're judging where they're at and stop assuming and arguing up front. So we do that by asking these open-ended questions. So how content have you been in finding rentals that fit your needs and wants within your price range? I ask these questions and I open up the conversation as a trusted advisor and not as a negotiator. And as they answer these questions, I can drill down. So when they say, ideal living situation is just a wonderful place with my family, no commute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, whatever. What are your nice to haves versus your need to haves? And they kind of say some of that. I'm actually causing them to be discerning. Instead of saying, I want everything at a low price, which is how people typically come at this, I get them to start speaking a little bit more reasonably. I get them thinking nice versus need. That takes them out of emotional brain and into rational brain. I ask their thoughts on the present rental market, and usually that'll allow them to be a little bit more discerning. Rents seem a little high all over. Now they're looking at things relative, not just to us, our price and this property, but other places they've looked at. Again, this is a very deliberate line of questioning here. I would use them almost verbatim if you could. And then how content have you been in finding rentals that fit your needs and wants? And that's going to force them to say things like, well, we're having to be compromising. We're having to be reasonable. We found some really great places at some really good rents, but not necessarily in the best location for us to where we want to be. And then I found places that were really high priced and they were in wonderful. That type of discernment is what I want to bring out from them. And what I'm listening there is I'm basically programming them to be more fair in their assessment. What I'm doing is I'm listening to what their bargaining chips are. What matters most to them? Very, very deliberate. I know these questions in advance, so I don't have to be thinking of these questions. Instead, I have my active listening ears on. So that's as fast as I can say that without giving you the 6-hour class. So step number 2, we have to now demonstrate an increase in value, or that's with a renewal. And if they are leasing, then we want to demonstrate that our value meets or exceeds what they're looking for. And we have to do this in an honest way. So thinking about this in relation to renewals, how do we increase value with a renewal? Well, it has to be abundantly clear that there is an ongoing effort to maintain and improve their renting situation. So, and say, what have you done for me lately? That's not helpful. The value you give should be relative to the price you ask for. And though legitimate arguments, market changes are poor persuaders of value. So I could very much turn to them and say, well, cost of living has gone up 4% and the market has changed and rents have gone up about $100 all around in this class of apartments in this price range. You know, the fact of the matter is that may be very true. But they're not here to discuss economics with me. They're here to discuss their home, which I am now going to make unaffordable potentially for them, or I'm lowering the value of it. That is significant emotional impact. If they have not seen all year long that we have maintained or improved value, I don't have a big leg to stand on. I just have some inconvenient facts for them. And so having that mindset, what we want to do is not just approach them and say, well, the market changes dictate this, true or not. Instead, it's better to be able to look back and demonstrate what we have done for them. And hopefully they've seen it without us even having to bring it up. And the way we do this is to be very practical about it is call and check on your tenants. If you only talk to your tenants at renewal time, that's a pretty big indication you're going to have tough negotiations on your hand. You need to call and check on them regularly, see how things are going. And in the world of property management, we really don't want to have to put in more maintenance orders, and we really don't want to be treating people like we're a hotel. And I get that. But if once a quarter you don't talk to them, or when you collect the rent, you don't talk to them, then negotiations at renewal time tend to be hard. Here's what I'm trying to get at. You know, most of the time when we talk to our tenants, it's when there's a problem. And after a while, it starts to change our mindset and we start to think that all we do is put out fires all day. We don't even hear the good news. Here's my big point. Neither do they. The only time I ever have to talk to my property manager is when I have a problem. That doesn't do well for programming their mind that this is a positive experience. But when we call them out of the blue and we say, how are things going? How are you enjoying the home? And they say, we're really loving it. It's been great weather. We've really enjoyed the back porch. It's just, that's why we got this place. It reinforces in them why they're here. And if we're only doing that during renewal conversations, well, we're extremely biased in that conversation and they'll pick up on that. So call and check on them regularly. Don't fall behind on maintenance. A lot of you property managers that deal with maintenance supervisors probably rolling your eyes right now, but you know what? Most surveys show that the maintenance is a primary driver of why people stick around. How many times have you heard it? I love the property manager. I love the leasing agent. But that's not why I'm leaving. This place is falling apart. Ongoing maintenance is important, but they need to see it. That's my point. They need to know we're doing it. Sending out letters that say things like, this month we're checking all of your ACs, or this month we drove around to check on the quality of your roof to make sure it was in good condition. Let us know if you see anything. Stuff like that lets them know, hey, we're here. We're actually working for you, is very, very important. They need to hear it. They don't. If it's behind the scenes, it's as if it didn't happen. Send letters and verbalize these efforts. Always have something coming. Hey, next month, don't make it sound like you're going to inspect them. Hey, next month we're coming around to see what areas need to be resodded. Hey, next month we're coming around to do sprinkler checks. Let them know what's coming. Don't just show up on their lawn and start doing sprinkler checks. Let them know what's coming. So again, mentally they know, hey, last month they came around and checked to make sure if we needed new roofs. This month they're coming around to check our irrigation. That's great stuff. You've already got your maintenance scheduled. Why not publish it to them so they can hear what they're doing? Honestly, I just send it with the rent notice. If you're sending a rent notice, have a little section there. It says what we did last month for you, what we're going to do next month for you. Just let them know that we're doing that. And here's the main thing. Build the relationship. Build a relationship with them that's not predicated upon problems only is huge. That demonstrates, that's the best way to do it, but you can always point back to that, of course, during your renewal time. Now, I want to get to this quickly. We only have a few minutes left. We have to then find agreements. This is really the meat of the negotiation. Some of you are looking for some real good tactics for negotiations. Let me get to this very important part about now finding the agreement, the actual negotiation conversation. If our value doesn't line up with their needs and why I love capitalism, right? Hey, if you really do know a place up the street that's just so much better for you based on your unique bargaining chips, then I actually want you to go there, because the last thing I want is miserable tenants. Go there. That said, not all of that glitters is gold. Grass isn't always greener on the other side of the fence. And we should guide this discovery process with them, again, as a trusted advisor and not just be on the opposing team. And if you do that and discover that they really would be better up the road, then it's up to them, but let them go. So here's some really important tactics to doing this. Number one, always ask questions on a scale of 1 to 10, not yes or no. Do you like living here is not a good question. Ask questions more like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well has this year gone? And they say, oh, it's gone. It's been a 7. All right, perfect. What would it have taken to make it a 10? So now they're not just pulling out everything. I want to know the difference between a 7 and a 10. And by the way, 8s and above will typically renew. 8s and above or 9s and above will typically lease. So we don't really have to fight with people that are 8s or 9s, although they will typically come in and try to negotiate for lower rents because, why not? So lead with questions like this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy have you been with the maintenance? On a scale of 1 to 10, how well is the design of the home still meeting your needs and wants? Scale of 1 to 10, how's your commute been? Things like that. Always do scale of 1 to 10, because yes and no, black and white type questions put us in a corner. And it puts them in a corner, and it doesn't allow us to get to the actual bargaining chips. We need to start renewal conversations well in advance. Renewal letters should be going out, 3 to 4 months in advance. And that sounds crazy, I know, to a lot of you, but if you require 60 days notice, then at 90 days, your renewal letters need to be in the mailbox. If you require 30 days notice, then 60 days out, they need to be in the mailbox. We need to have 30 days where it's not renew now or die, where we're forcing them to run around and scout around. But instead, we can have nice conversations with them. So after you send the letter, you should also follow up with a phone call and renewals. Don't wait for them to come to you. Plan a renewal appointment. And that's, again, I say this all the time, and I think there's like maybe one property manager has ever listened to me on this. But ideally, you will send a renewal letter. When it hits their mailbox, follow up, make sure they got it, and then say, hey, don't want to necessarily discuss that over the phone today, but would like to schedule a time for us to talk about this for 15 to 30 minutes. You don't have to decide on the phone call, but would like to just walk through the past year. And you're treating it almost like a performance review. I'd like to hear from you what's going well, what's not going well. Now, again, if I've been talking to them all year, it's not going to be a very difficult conversation because we've been talking. But plan a 15-minute renewal conversation, not an interruption. And try to schedule time. Why? Because between now and that scheduled appointment, when they're going to have that renewal conversation with you, they're going to be more likely to think rationally about what's going on. Please hear me on this. This is a big point. If you call them up and you ask them if they want to renew, primarily they're going to think emotionally about whether or not they want to renew. How do I feel about renewing right now? And you're going to get emotional answers. And that's why a lot of times it sounds like you're talking to crazy people that are irate during renewals because they're not rational. We get them rational by putting them in a rational mindset. Send the letters out 30 days before the notice is due, hits their mailbox, follow up with a phone call. Hey, I know you got the renewal letter. Not calling to discuss that today. Just want to make sure you got it and would like to schedule time, maybe a week or so from now, where we could have a 15-minute, 30-minute meeting to discuss the renewal. They say, sure. They mark it on the calendar. It's now on their calendar. I've got a whole week that's coming up. Since they see that conversation coming up, they begin thinking through it. Maybe they ask themselves deep questions like, do I really want to live here or not? All the emotions come out. They feel through it. They sleep on it a couple nights, then boom, they come to the meeting, and hopefully you have a more rational conversation. Now, is it possible that during that time their feelings and emotions have snowballed? Always a possibility. Always a possibility. But they'll be very clear on what their bargaining chips are. They'll have emotionally thought through, and even though their bargaining chips may be louder, their bargaining chips will be very, very clear and will trump lesser things. And so it's actually a better conversation because it's the real conversation, where sudden renewal conversations are usually not. Now, a lot of property managers like to avoid this because they feel if we can just kind of slip in and get the renewal real quick, just long term, it doesn't make for great relationships. So hopefully you're taking something away from that. Now, very important point as we start to land the plane here, never disagree with opinions. Remember, value chips, bargaining chips are relative. They're not true or false. They're relative to the individual. So when they have an opinion like this place is a dump, or when they have an opinion like this is the best place anyone could ever live, we want to empathize with those opinions, not necessarily just bring a contrary opinion. That doesn't help. So when they say, I really love living here, I just feel like the rent's a little high, our response is, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. I find it helpful to be able to help you by understanding how you feel. That's an empathy type of thing. We build trust instead of going, well, actually, it's a lot more expensive up the road. That doesn't help anything. So never disagree with opinions. Your opinion actually hurts always. You need to burn that into your brain. Always empathize, however. Lowering price always has the potential to damage trust. Just understand that when someone has a perceived value and then we are willing to lower our value, it's almost like saying to them like, hey, that value is always inflated. I never really meant it. I'm not against lowering price when you understand the bargaining chips and it really becomes a way to get things moving forward. I just like it to be a last resort because typically when you've been fighting for a certain perceived value and then you just lower it, you just admitted you had inflated value. It just doesn't usually help. So use the bargaining chips from step one to give more instead. And what I mean by that is if they have said these three things are most important, then I actually want to give those things more. Like if they love it that you clean their carpets at renewal time, then clean their carpets twice next year. Do it every 6 months because that's so much more valuable to them. And if there's nothing you can do, if their favorite thing is their garage and you can't give them more garage, then you actually want to just remind them at how nice it is to have a garage and how few garages there are in the area. Remind them of their bargaining chips that they appreciate. It's 12:30, so let me wrap this up. As I said earlier in the broadcast, cost of living and market rate increases always cut both ways. So when you're going to use cost of living or market increases as a reason to raise rent, just understand that when things go down, they're going to want your rents to go down too. And very important, long-term renters, as opposed to transient renters, which are the majority, transient renters are the majority. Long-term renters think like owners, unfortunately, actually. So be as compassionate with them as you are transparent. That renter who's like, can't believe rent goes up every year, if we're being honest, they're thinking like an owner. They should probably go get a mortgage that's fixed at 30 years. All right? I mean, amen somebody, right? Like, hey, you're renting. What did you expect? We're giving you a rent that's only good for a year. You're getting all these benefits by only paying a rent, having no responsibility and no commitment. And now you want it to never change. You should go get a mortgage and take on all that other stuff. Right? That's the realistic thing that long-term renters that are staying in one place tend to not think like that. But hitting them with that cold glass of water isn't always the best thing. So be compassionate, be empathetic with them, but be transparent. Don't like lie, play the shell game. Like, no, rents are just going up. Just let them know. Like, our rents are relative to the market and we completely understand why you feel that way. For a long-term renter, it can be very, very difficult. But just have realistic conversations with them. Be human and don't be the opposition. And at the end of the day, if you empathetically play for win-win, your win and their win, that's the idea there. I'm playing for their win, playing with their bargaining chips and mine as a trusted advisor, coming alongside and not just fighting for our chips. If you do that, then even when you lose the negotiation, you'll gain the respect of those you can't close. And I that has been my experience, even when I've had to raise rents $150 on people and they've left, is that they understood and it was unfortunate, But I've had very few people storm out of my office because of the way I've handled this as a win-win person. I knew what their bargaining chips were and I couldn't meet them. And oftentimes I was even the first one to say, I can understand why you might not want to stay here. And sometimes they've gone, no, I really do. But the situation is, this is where we're at. And sometimes they get very reasonable because they know I'm being a trusted advisor. Apologize, we went a couple minutes over today. I hope that has been helpful in readjusting your mindset. I have to imagine it's brought up some questions. So if you want to stay into some overtime here, I'm happy to answer some questions. I believe you can request to talk, or you can type your questions into the chat. I'd appreciate if you at least let me know if it was helpful, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, or just say it was helpful or what was helpful, if you had a big takeaway. But any questions you have, or any scenarios you want to run through, I'm happy to go over here 10 minutes and answer them. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that while I hydrate, because these quick learns, I have to talk nonstop. All right, we got one question here from Nicole. She says, loss of rent if it doesn't get re-rented. Or did I click that? Oh, no, that was your point. Yes, I marked that as a question. It was not a question. So Patricia said 10. Thanks. Looking forward to seeing you again back at Pros soon, hopefully. Patricia, Tim says, is general anyone waiving renewal increases because of COVID? I thought there might be some COVID questions. I was actually worried no one would even attend this webinar because of COVID right now. How the heck are we negotiating in COVID? So is in general, anyone waiving renewal increases? And that may be actually a poll for everybody. So if you want to answer Tim's questions, I'm curious to hear from the group. Anyone waiving renewal increases because of COVID? I would say what we saw from the different property management organizations, their last month's report was 90% of rents had been paid on time. That was in April. I don't know the numbers for May. Most of you probably have them. But since 90% of rents were paid, not many people were waiving rents because of that. I would say renewal increases are still primarily relative to the market. I would not be surprised if most independent property managers were not increasing rents, but I'm actually surprised that most independent property managers tend to not increase rent as much as the multifamily market, which is more my background, is. Multifamily, we always raise rents relative to the market, unfortunately. Patricia says she's not increasing rents. She's waiving late fees, but not renewal fees. Yours are minimal. Renewal fees, of course, I think that's probably not as common. So waiving late fees, I think, are good. As long as you give a very hard and fast date when that rent has to be paid, and tell them that the late fee will be given at that time. If you remove the late fee and say, and you're good to pay on the 15th, and then there's no penalty on the 15th, they'll probably come back and ask for more mercy on the 15th. So I would just say we're deferring your late fee till the 15th. And see if that helps a little bit. And then on the 15th, if they bring you half rent or a partial and you want to waive their late fee at that time, I think that would be fine. I think again, what we have to always avoid in property management is not becoming the moral judge. That's the difficult thing. So-and-so lost their job, so I'm waiving their late fee, and so-and-so's just having a tough time, and so-and-so's mother died, and we start getting into those situations and we're going to get ourselves in a world of hurt. So instead, we're best to lead with policy and give consideration, have our policy be considerate in general, goes a lot better. And so, in general, we understand this is a tough time for a lot of people. So for those who are having a tough time, by the way, you qualify that, the renter, if you're having a tough time, we're offering 15-day deferrals of late fees. So as long as you pay your rent by the 15th, we will defer your late fee until the 16th. I think that works a lot better. Any other last minute questions as we start to land the plane here? Really wish we had a little bit more time to get into some of this. But hopefully you're taking away those questions and that approach. it really, again, 9 times out of 10, I'm asked, when I was a property manager, my leasing agents would come to me and they'd say, I've got so-and-so in the room. We're negotiating a renewal. They're all upset about X, Y, and Z, and they want lower rent. They're all upset about our increase and they want lower this. Or I've got so-and-so in here and they're telling me up the road it's a better deal and they're either going to rent there or they're going to renew and go down there or whatever. And it was almost always the same thing. There's not a magic word I can say. The issue is, what is our relationship with this person like? What is their perceived value? And when I go in there, and they would say to me, my agents would say to me, Tom, I've told them everything. I told them that we put in new landscaping. I told them that we're going to clean their carpets. I told them that, rent is relative to market. I told them all the value of our bargaining chips. And I would go in there and just sit down with them and just ask a bunch of open-ended questions. And I would just watch them visibly decompress as they answered questions and got more reasonable. And once I saw they were being reasonable, the indicator that they're being reasonable is they would say both pros and cons. They would start saying stuff like, I know you guys are working really hard to help us. Things like that. And I hadn't said anything at that point. Anything I say would have been defensive. I just go in and ask a bunch of open-ended questions and get their value chips. And once I have their value chips, I would just say to them, so what I understand is this is what's actually most important to you. You've given us 100 reasons why we're not doing our job, but this is the thing that's most important to you. And they'd say, yes, let's focus in on that. Let's focus in on that. What have we done? What have we not done? Come alongside. Let's look at a pros cons here. So what have we done? Try to get their perspective. What have we done to actually help that? They would say, well, actually, you guys did come by and pressure wash, or you guys did do this and that. Okay. Well, what haven't we done? Well, you haven't done this. And usually at that point in time, they'd be so reasonable and so considerate, and I'd been empathetic and understanding and got it all out on the table, that I usually only had to do something really, really small. And even though I wouldn't 100% meet all of their demands, at that point in time, they became reasonable. I would do what I could towards that vital bargaining chip. And a lot of times get people to say, all right, I need to calm down. I'm sorry. And they would sign the renewal. That usually worked like a charm every single time. At least I would win them over in the relationship, even if they still left. And my leasing agents would say, how did you do that? Well, I've told you how I did it. It wasn't some sort of magic art. It's just how you approach mediations. It's how you approach arguments. It's how you approach these things. And when you do it in renewals and leasing situations, it works very, very well. So, all right. Glad that was helpful to you guys. You have the slides. You can download those. I've shared those with you. Here's your homework. Walk out of here and ask yourself, what does it look like this? Is there anything I haven't been doing over the course of the year coming up to them that I now think I could do? Am I building relationships and building perceived value throughout the year? And am I approaching difficult conversations at renewal or during leases with open-ended questions first, really understanding them? Or am I coming with all my best arguments that I feel like a reasonable person, which they may or may not be, should see? Ask yourselves these questions, and as you kind of find some areas for improvement, come back, look at these slides again, find ways that you might be able to improve them based on the tips I've given. Until next time, guys, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I will see you on the next webinar.